Awesome. So I'm here with Eliseo Martinez. I've known him for a couple of years already. So Eliseo has worked as a top closer for Ravi Abuvala at Scaling with Systems. He's also worked with Jeremy Miner at seventh level. So if you're watching this video, level is basically the number one sales training company in the online space. And Eliseo was a top rep at this company. He also worked as growth operator for Dr. Soda, a digital doctor, scaling the company from 60K a month to over 1.5 million a month in 3 years, working on the basically managing the whole sales operation. So today my goal is to really dive deep into closing and pick up his brain when it comes to the closing process. So Eliseo, can you tell me a little bit about how you got started into high ticket closing?
Yeah, of course. So I started off as an appointment setter initially for Ravi at Scaling with Systems. That was my first like official online role per se. But before that, I was doing door-to-door sales was my initial actual entry point to sales altogether. And then through appointment setting, I was able to then transition to closing right after that. So that's where I moved on with Jeremy Miner and with the doctor.
Okay, got it. Awesome. And how did you transition from being an appointment setter to like on the high ticket closing side?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. I was appointment setting for about like 6 to 7 months. And it was a bit of like a growth within appointment setting as well. So it started off as appointment setting via just text, like Instagram DMs. Then I started triaging to get a little bit more improvement on my communication and talking with people. And then from there, I was starting to set my own deal. So I wanted to become a closer, but at the time they didn't really need more closers.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a point where one of the closers was, pretty at at risk of being let go just simply due to their performance and the longevity of it continuing to go on. And I wanted to start closing. I was like, well, it'd be interesting to start closing. But of course, a lot of times, like the company is pretty big, so usually they'll find somebody who already has a really good track record. About like, hey, how can I enter in? And so we kind of came to agreement with the business owner where I can set my own deals via outbound, and then I can have some of those calls. Right, I would still be setting for some of the closers, but let's say after 3 sets per day or 4 sets per day, the other remaining sets that I have for the remaining of that day, I can continue and I can put that onto my own calendar to
Mhm.
practice. And so that allowed me to then start getting start hitting KPIs, right? Even just as an outbound with your ads. And so, of course, as a business owner, that's very profitable. You don't have to spend, for that cost per booking, cost per acquisition a lot lower, just due to it coming in from the lead opt-in form, the freebie lead magnets and things like that, being able to transition somebody from, a level of interest, but to an actual
Mhm.
buyer and turning that into cash. And so that's where I started to get into closing and then doing it with more inbound. And then I continued to utilize both outbound and inbound to serve me long term.
Interesting. Got it. And did you like were you good at high ticket closing right away? Like,
No, definitely not. So I had a lot of like struggle originally when it came to just communication. So I've always identified or saw myself a little bit more as introverted. Like I'm not casually somebody who wants to be talking to people all day. But and even in the beginning, like I was kind of like this awkward at times, right? Even just asking the challenging questions, reading from the script when something didn't feel right, like I just didn't feel like it resonated the way that I speak to people in general, but I had
mhm.
to read it that way in the script, like it would come off, right? And so I feel like that definitely caused me to initially have a little bit of awkwardness getting into closing and identifying closing to like reading a script and then just kind of pushing people over the line, right? Versus, I guess, the way that we've seen the changes with clothing now and the way that I do it, which has allowed me to make a lot more money, which is actually listening, but have leadership throughout the call and asking the challenging questions when necessary, but making sure that they're very direct and to the point and specific to that person rather than just something that's cookie cutter, one size fits all approach.
Yes, definitely. You said something about leadership. Like, how did you transition from like I guess lacking that leadership that you maybe you just didn't having the conversation to actually embracing that leadership that you needed on the sales call?
Yeah, that started off more with self identity more than anything else, right? Because leadership, at least for me, I used to always like think of it like, okay, do I have to like be yelling across the room? Do I have to be like bossing people around? But it's like identifying leadership with again, like guiding somebody towards the right direction. And first off, they have to see me as a leader. So the next part to that came like, okay, what do I do on a day-to-day basis that even allows me to feel like I should even be a leader to somebody else, right? Because
Mm.
with leadership, I always thought about it more as like, okay, for me to genuinely be a leader, like I have to self-identify as a leader. And I can't self-identify with myself as a leader if I feel like I'm lacking or, missing out on things that I should be doing. So for example, optimizing my health, optimizing the actual things that I do on a day-to-day, like as a closer, if I was starting to lead the team of 5 other closers, then I was telling them to do their KPIs and fill out their trackers and do this, and that during the calls, and I wasn't do it. Like it was just that part of alignment with leadership where I felt like I can only lead to the level that I am. And if I'm lacking in something and if I know I'm falling short on something, like I could, per se say that I'm doing it, but I think internally we can always identify that, hey, if we're not doing it, it's going to come off and it's going to rub off in the way that you start actually presenting yourself. And so it's always been important to like start then prioritizing my self identity, which is changing my health habits, my eating habits, the way that I actually like do the work and study and the things that I do to excel so that I can also demand that of other people.
Yes, 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 100%. Yeah, it's super interesting how it's a mirror at the end, like when it comes to the way that you're living outside of the conversation. And sometimes that's a mirror in terms of how effective you're being in a conversation. So yeah, it's super interesting. And yeah, at the end, it's human psychology. But getting straight into like the sauce of what I feel people want to hear. I wrote a couple of questions over here. So really the first one, and something that I've even struggled like throughout my journey, selling high ticket services as well as a business owner, is like, for example, when a prospect says, okay, I really like your process, I really like your mechanism when it comes to getting results, but I'm just not ready to move forward right now. I'm willing to just wait a little bit and I feel comfortable, right? How do you shift that conversation to be able to direct them onto the closing process?
Yeah, so it's usually something that happens before during the discovery call, right? Like if they're in one thing that we call happy ears, which is like, okay, they're telling you everything you want to hear. It's those people that'll tell you, hey, I'm like 100% in, like, but I'll definitely do this in 3 days from now, right? And for anybody who's had sales calls, they know that when they'll think about objections, like 90% of the times they don't come back, like not, or maybe even more for a lot of
Yes.
closers, 95% of the times they don't come back. So it's that happy ears, and you have to identify maybe at the time, a lot of times that I've seen it actually occurs is because there just wasn't enough urgency built.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that there's not enough problems that we were able to identify and then helping the other person feel like they're accountable to resolving that problem.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, right, and it's something that I learned even back then from some people like at 7th level, the inner
Yes.
circle when I was mentored with Jeremy, which is like the problem is the root of the sale. Like you can only go so as high and like helping them resolve and become actionable to make a change as low as you actually get during the discovery into the problem. Because one thing is like identifying a problem with that person and them seeing it, and it's another thing where they take the responsibility to actually change it. And it's a big issue that a lot of people do during the calls, where they think that because they just found a problem and they went forward with that problem, that that's going to be enough to actually move the needle forward to make a sale. And what they realize is that they're still getting these objections because there's even deeper phases to that problem that we didn't uncover during the call, which has led us to actually get to think about it. Because somebody who is genuinely in a position where they understand their problem and they identify that they need to actually make a change, they realize that they're the ones in charge of making that change. Then again, like it's our role as a salesperson, closer, to help them make that change. And the other caveat to the actual identifying the problem is where we can identify a problem, but we also have to help the person realize that they're the ones responsible for changing it. Because sometimes we'll get a problem and then somebody's gonna make the excuse onto somebody else, onto something else. They'll be like, no, well, I didn't achieve it because I was in school at the time, because I was living with my parents, was because of this and that. And if you allow them to continue with that language, it's likely going to just be the same thing that keeps them from getting any success even after they hop off the call. And so when they need to think about it, a lot of times, again, just going back to the basis of where it came from, was a lot of times the things that you didn't do during the discovery, which is a deep enough problem, the layers of those problems, and then help them realize that they're the ones responsible at the end of the day,
Mm.
nobody else, so that they also know they have to be the ones to make the changes at the very end. right? So if they give you and I need to think about it or give me a couple of days, right? It's now identifying, hey, what is it that you want to like spend a couple of days kind of going over your mind, right? They'll start going into this and that. Or there's even the other option, which is something I learned from Jeremy, which is you just want to detach yourself from it and help them feel a little bit more comfortable during the call, where you simply just agree with them, go move forward with, okay, what you mentioned 2 to 3 days from now, like Thursday, Friday, whatever the case is, 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. You act like you're like scheduling the next call. And right before you go, you're like, and before I go, what is it that you wanted to go over in your mind before we talk on Friday? So I know how to best help you. And then a lot of times they're going to go ahead and actually tell you the objection that I think about it was with the actual layer of, because think about it is not an actual objection. There's something behind that.
Yes, yes, definitely. So it's not enough just uncovering the actual problem, but also making them understand that they're responsible for actually solving that, right? Like it's that mix, not just calling out the problem, I guess, and
Yeah,
identifying
exactly.
it.
So it's almost like with a business owner, right? If we tell them, like, let's say we're like a sales agency company or something, helping them with their sales reps, right? And they realize that their performance of their team has been down like for 6 months. But then they're also like, well, I just let these two underperforming reps go. Like it should be all good now. We should be profitable now.
Mhm.
Right? Again, they put it onto something else. Like at the end of the day, like we have to help that business owner realize that he wasted whatever 3 to 6 months not being a leader enough to either help those reps or let them go early enough. So
Yes.
how is he actually in a position to genuinely, make any difference now? Like what's going to be different even if those two reps did leave?
Mhm.
Helping him realize that early on, so he actually feels like he's accountable to making a decision now, making a decision altogether to actually make the change in the company. Because if he thinks it's just because of those two bad sales reps that caused his company to go down, and he doesn't see himself as the actual reason, because ultimately,
Mhm.
like it's is the leader, the business owner's decision to not have let them go or to not have trained them well enough or even have hired them properly as to why the company is down, right? It's not the sales rep. And if they keep thinking to sales rep, at the end of the call, they're going to be like, well, now, maybe I don't need your service. Maybe I can go to Facebook Marketplace and find some sales reps, right?
Yes.
So it's first thing identifying the problem, but understanding how they're accountable to resolving it and why that problem even came in the first place. But again, 100% because of something they did or did not do.
Mhm. Yes, yes, that's super interesting. Yeah, that mix of sometimes we really uncover the problem, but we're like conversationally wise, we're not good enough to actually make them understand that they're responsible for that in a very fluid way. Definitely. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the next question that I overhear, it's like, well, you already talked a little bit about this actually, but like when they need to think about it, like what's your approach in those cases?
Yeah, I still pretty much use the Jeremy Miner's approach, what I learned from him like about 2 years ago. Like it's worked
Mhm.
well for me. I mix it up every so often, but it doesn't really happen too much nowadays because again, it does come up only if I decide to lack in my part, like on the department of discovery. If I just
Yes.
decide to be lazy one day and just not go through discovery enough, or just kind of loathe through the sales call, then I'll get the thing about it, which I just fall back into that.
So it's a
But the
lack of a good discovery in that case.
Yeah, it's a lack of good discovery, and again, the accountability and making sure that you help that person realize that they're 100% accountable to making the change. Because with the pain, then you just build the urgency, and then you make sure that they understand they're 100% the one that is going to be the difference between whether they actually get see progress or go upwards, or if
Mhm.
they continue to stay where they are and things get worse. Right? It just goes back to, so that way when they think about it, they can't be a wife or a spouse objection because again, they're the ones responsible ultimately. So whether their wife is on board or not, like they have to do it,
Mhm.
right? They feel like there was enough urgency or pain that needs to be resolved. Money objection, right? A lot of times it could be money, and if it is money, right, we can identify it pretty quickly. There's cost of inaction. So with B2B, like let's say sales, right, it's very easy to put a figure to it. You're able to say, well, you've lost XYZ amount per month. How much longer are you willing to lose $50,000 per month for not having a good sales rep who can close
Yes.
more deals for you, right? That's so then you can quantitate an actual figure. And then again, there's fear at the very end, which is kind of like, again, that's more like something that likely can still occur because it change and people don't like change. So, and that's one of the more easier ones to actually overcome, because again, you're just helping them self-identify with the next level type of person that you want to become. And so in order for them to actually become the next person, like the next layer of person identity, that they want to become, that business owner who actually owns a $1 million per month company, then they have to make decisions like a $1 million per month business owner, and not
Yeah.
like one who's making 200K a month.
Yes.
Right.
And
So
I feel like that's something that, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, and that's where I get into like identity. It's so important with like these
Mhm.
fear objections, and it just in general throughout that conversation, because they have to become that person before they make these decisions, like somebody who will become that person.
Yes, 100%. That makes a lot of sense because even there's different types of services where inherently there's a little bit of risk. For example, if they're paying like for an agency service or even a coaching offer, where they can think, okay, what if it doesn't work? Like, what if I don't succeed? Like after going through the process. So they start thinking risk wise. But what you said about, okay, what's this new identity of this point, like 2.0 person that you want to be, like how do they actually function and how do they actually think? So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's also identity wise. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like with health, right? If somebody
Mhm.
wants to like lose weight and they're like obese by like, overweight by 20 pounds or something, and they want to lose weight, get shredded, be like very fit, they first have to identify themselves as somebody that's fit. So they have to actually eat healthy. They have to go to the gym daily. They have to optimize their sleep, health, and all these different things. And then with time, again, they'll become that person. But first, they have to become that identity. If they keep the identity of a fat person who's overweight, who has nothing going on with his life, and they keep that identity, they're not going to get fit. Right.
Mhm.
And that's what we with just people who continue to stay in that position. But once they identify with, hey, I'm not this overweight person who loathes in bed all day and gets home and eats, whatever's in the counter. It's like, I'm the type of person who's actually fit, shredded, muscular, in the best shape, top percentage of shape in the world. And they
Mhm.
identify with that. They'll eat healthy, they'll do the right things, and with time, they'll actually become that.
Yes. How do you know when you're ready? Like, what's your indicator uh, for knowing that they're ready to actually buy? Like, do you keep like a mental like checklist of, okay, I just did this, now this is check, like fear, objection, urgency, that's enough. Like, okay, now I'm ready to go for the close.
Yeah, sometimes I don't really necessarily like, usually with the pitch, we're referring to like the pitch when we're into
Mhm.
discovery, like unless I felt like there's enough like pain and again accountability that's been said there, then we would transition to the pitch, which is like based on what we talked about and what we're doing here could definitely help you. And again, like I also have to connect the dots and feel like, hey, this is something that we can genuinely help this person out with. They
Yes.
realize as well, like, or they kind of told me their pain, they're aware of that pain, and they're also like, again, accountable and understanding that they're 100% the reason that this pain even started and why it lingered on for so long. They've already told me a couple of things that tell me that they actually want to make a change. So hey, like let's get into the actual pitch per se. Let's get into
Yes.
presenting what the actual solution is. And so by the time we get into that, like a lot of times, I mean, it's a bit of a cue. Like once I give them the pitch and maybe they have some questions, like I always just have this like end line, which is, do you have any other questions or how would you like to proceed from here? And so usually they'll initiate like, yeah, well, how much does this cost? Right. So they'll initiate the actual, like, let's
Mhm.
talk about the investment. And that's usually the way that I have always approached it. But if in terms of like the pitch, I always want to identify that I feel that we can actually help them, that they understand their problem and what it takes to a level of degree, like the solution that it's going to take to resolve that problem. And they've identified or they've been willing to actually uncover themselves to realize that they do need to become a different person in order to actually achieve that next phase. And so then we would actually get to the pitch, the conversation of resolving. And then from there, we're just getting into the actual finances or maybe overcoming fear.
Yes. Yes. That makes sense. So what I'm hearing is like responsibility, like identity, pain, before you transition into the pitch? Like, would you say that you're doing tie downs into each of those to make sure that they're actually feeling the pain, that they are aware of their problem, that they're responsible for their problem, and that that they also resonate with this 2.0 version identity wise that they have to become? Like, do you make like specific questions for each of those?
I don't have specific questions. Sometimes they come in different forms. Right? A lot of times we get into the pain They're like, well, I
Yes.
don't want to be here any longer. Like, I know I have to do something. Okay, but why now? Right now, we can just break down a bit of the
Mhm.
urgency of seeing how important this really is for them to resolve. Well, like, if I can do it today, then I'll do it. Like, as soon as I find a solution, I'll resolve it. Right. So it's just things like that.
Yeah. And what if like the way that they're responding is like, okay, yeah, I mean, no, it's not really urgent. How do you go deeper into making sure that they're actually like aware enough that this is a problem?
Yeah, well, sometimes I could even unsell them, right? So the whole point of a sales
Mm,
call for me, it's not always been to like a successful sales call doesn't always mean that you close the deal, and that's what I think a lot of people assume, which
100%.
is why they
Yeah.
put why they push themselves down when they see that they didn't close the deal. You'll see closers who are like, "Well, if I didn't close this deal, it wasn't successful." But
Mhm.
again, a successful deal doesn't mean that you closed it. Sometimes it's again having the most human and understanding conversation with that person on the other side to identify if there is alignment. And if there isn't, then you just don't move forward. You could even tell them before you even pitch. Like if you identify very early on, you just want to start unselling them. Or if you identify those types of like, oh, I don't really care about resolving this, or it's just not, they're just not taking it seriously, then I'll let them know on the call, which is going back to the pushback. We have to
Mhm.
be a bit comfortable with doing that. It's like, hey, it doesn't really sound like, this is actually a big issue for you. Like, is this something you actually want to solve? They'd be like, no, not really. Like sometimes you actually get people who are like, no, not, I guess not really. I guess I was just hopping on to see if maybe, but no. And
Yes.
again, you kind of push them
And
because
in
again, if
mhm.
maybe you can run in circles and try to get them interested and, close them or try to tie them down. But all that's going to cause is for them to like refund or come back and be like a bad client. And if you're the business owner, like as a business owner, like that just takes away, one bad client takes more away than like a few good clients. So just focus on the good clients,
100%.
rather than being the refund or all the craziness from like a client who just wasn't supposed to be there. So if I
Yes.
can identify, um, if I
But
identify like
mhm.
that type of language or type of person who doesn't feel we can help them, and if I've identified it even early on, like there'll be times where
Mhm.
I identify, like maybe they're coming in for marketing solutions, but I realize that they actually, I don't know, like maybe need a different leadership way or something. Like they actually need a different way to actually lead the team, or maybe they have a really shitty offer and they're coming to me for marketing, right? They have a um, horrible actual like service and offer, and they just want to like invest 5K with me to market for them. I'll just be like, hey, like I don't think you're in a position right now,
Yes.
based on what you told me, right? You have made 2 sales in the past 2 months, and you don't have a team, everything's disorganized. So again, like you could close them. Let's say, oh, I have 5K to give you in marketing. I say, I don't
Yeah.
recommend you actually.
But
It
no
doesn't.
amount of traffic will fix a shitty offer. So yeah.
Exactly. Again,
uh,
it's one of those things I identify, then I'll just tell them like straight up. And again, they'll be thankful for it. And if they resolve that issue, whatever the case is, like let's say the one with the marketing, if they resolve that, they're like, oh, I rechanged my offer and structure, and I appreciate that you're transparent for me. Now that I do need marketing, like I'm coming back to you.
mhm.
And so I've had
Yeah.
some of those situations where like they do come back because again, they're appreciative. They don't see that every day where somebody isn't, is okay with not taking their money. Right there.
100%. Yes, yes. And it's also mindset shift of being an actual consultant versus someone that is just like trying to sell them on their service. So that makes sense. Um, Next question, like what's your method like for making sure that the prospect sees like enough ROI to justify a yes, which is I guess the cost of inaction inherently, that's it. But
Mhm.
how do you know when you know that you already went deep enough, like ROI wise, like on that cost of inaction? Okay, like I understand now that he actually sees it. Like, for example, justifying a 10K like sale when it's a little bit uncomfortable for the prospect or something like that.
Yeah, so like yeah, so especially when it's very numbers based, like let's say a relationship, you can't really quantify a
Hmm.
number there, per se, right? Or health, you can't quantify per se what is losing 30 pounds worth to you,
Yes.
by year. But if it's like a numbers focused thing like marketing or sales, right, you can definitely quantify per se like the numbers behind like where they want to be, where they're at, and where they felt like they should have been. So
Hmm.
let's say sales rep example, like let's say that a business owner comes to me and they have a $10,000 offer. They have a closer who's closing at 20%. He's been closing at 20% for the past 5 months, right? So like, okay, and the business owner is like, well, I used to have a rep that used to close at 44%, or I, as a business owner, used to close at 50%. And now I have somebody replacing me, which is cool, but like they're closing almost like less than half now.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, like if you were continuing to take calls, or if you had a good rep that was closing at 40%, like how much money would your business be making per month additionally? Well, instead of 50K a month, we would be making 100K a month. How long has that closer been with you? Oh, he's been here for 8 months. Say, okay, so it's been 8 months, averaging 20% close rate. You mentioned 50,000 a month is, the additional what you would have been making had you had a good performer to the level of standard that you wanted them to. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so now we just multiply what 8 months that's spent going on times 50%, or times the 50,000 a month that they lost inherently. So it's like, okay, so this year you've essentially lost $400,000 because you weren't willing or able to actually find a closer who was able to close at 30-40%.
Yes.
Oh yeah, shit. Right. It's like, what's prevented you, or why haven't you made the changes to actually find a closer, knowing that you're losing 50K a month? And they'll
Yes.
be like, oh, I just never sat down and do numbers, but now that you tell me it, so clear, like, oh shit, like I'm losing 50,000 per month.
Mm-hmm. And normal
Which,
that.
and yeah, exactly. And then from there, we can kind of put a hypothetical situation, which again, depending on the situation, we can do it, which is for the business owner. It's like, and you had 50,000 a month, like what would you even have done with those funds? Oh, I probably would have put into ads. I'd probably have 2 more closers now. We'd
Mhm.
actually probably 300K a month. And so, right, instead of the 50K a month, right, they're probably quantifying that they've lost more than that 400K, because that's only per se if everything worst case scenario was just the exact same and
Yes.
they didn't invest into ads. So a lot of the times those hypothetical scenarios can really help us, because they'll be like, no, I would have already invested in a team. I likely would already have a company doing 500,000 a month. Like, oh shit, like this year has gone by and I just didn't resolve this. And so it's easier to build urgency and quantify a cost. So
Mhm.
by the time that sales pitch, if you say 20K, that's a drop in the bucket for having lost $400,000.
Yes.
At that point, it's just them feeling like you are the person who can genuinely help them, and you have like outlined that very clearly during the conversation of the solution.
And how about like in an offer that is not ROI directed, like a relationship offer, as you said,
Yeah, so
like
if
a
it's something
dating
more
one?
like a relationship, that's a little bit, I've always, I guess like I've never tried to quantify per se like the relationship. I definitely always try to go deep on the pain, and with a
Mm.
big enough pain, a long enough period of time, like people are willing to solve the issue. And so, I mean, for my personal experience, like I think the highest non-financial type of offer I've sold was like 7K, which I was able to do. But from my experience, has always just been you speak to the right people, something is always going to be worth to them. Where I don't self-identify what's something worth to me as to the reason why somebody else won't pay it. So what I mean by that is I don't assume because I wouldn't pay 7K for relationship help to find a partner that I should assume that another person shouldn't pay that.
Yes.
Right? Because they're in a different position, right? Maybe they're like a finance guy making 400K a year. And by not having a partner and spending all this extra time on dating apps, they're actually losing like 10 hours a week worth of time, which if we quantify that to their work, that 7K, and depending how long that's been going on, you can now quantify that there is. But we also can't quantify per se a pain
Based
if
on
they
pain.
felt like
Yeah.
just lost and they don't have a partner and they're just unfulfilled and unhappy and feeling like maybe they finally want to settle down and be with something. There's not per se a way that I can quantify that. Um, and I never try to quantify it with a number and see like
Yeah,
how
I
much
guess
money.
it's just like the like the thermometer of pain, like how much pain they're actually feeling, right?
Exactly, right. And then you take that with different things, like people who get like surgery, rhinoplasty, facial plastic surgeon, like that confidence. You don't qualify a number behind your confidence.
Yeah.
You hypothetically say, yeah, if you're more confident, maybe you're more open to connecting with people and those connections can make you more money, whatever,
Mhm.
right? You can qualify, but that's all hypothetical, right? We could only go as
Yes.
far as how painful it is and how long it's been going on, and if they're willing to like finally get past that. Again,
Mhm.
like it has, and they'll justify the actual price with the emotions that they feel because they weren't able to resolve it or haven't been able to.
Yes, 100%. How do you usually like build a sense of urgency like on calls without coming across like too desperate or like pushy?
Yeah, so everything ties back down to them. Like I never try to push with something that's my motive. So if it's like an urgency, like let's say their business and how much if they tell me that they wanted to have a $1 million per month business, and again, right now they're making 200K a month, and we've identified during that call that there's so many issues going on. They haven't been actually taking the response to make the changes. Like the urgency is around just that, and the
Mhm.
identity changes that they need to make, and how willing they are to do it, and then why now, right? And then they'll justify it. Like I'm not there to tell them like, hey, you need to because you've lost 800K throughout this year, and you need to do it now. Right. So I don't tell them anything. I simply just ask them the questions that get them to open up and identify that this is something that needs to change. And
Mhm.
it's because their motive, right? It needs to change because, I've always wanted to have a $1 million per month business so I can do this and that. And I realized that by, trying to be like this remote CEO and being away all the time, it's actually cost me a lot of money. And I'm no longer willing to do that. Right. And those are all languages of him in his life. It's not, I'm doing it because Eliseo is telling me to, and he'll give me a 50% discount if I do it today.
Mhm.
So it all goes down to making sure it's all relevant to them.
Yes, 100%. But what if like for example, I feel like some people feel uncomfortable when asking those questions, like, okay, why is that important for you right now? Or why now, like specifically, and not like 6 months ago? Like I feel like, for example, even me, sometimes I can feel uncomfortable when asking that to a business owner that is already at a certain level. Um, why do you feel like that happens? Like in some high ticket closers, business owners selling services, and how would you say that they can overcome that feeling?
Yeah, I would always tie that down to like the identity frame. Like, why are you nervous to talk to that one? Do you see somebody of that level just completely like a new layer? Like, or do you see them as like this king, or it's almost like
Mhm.
to like, do you almost pedestalize them to the degree where you don't feel like just because they're making more money than you can't ask them a question? Like at the end of the day, they're human, right? I've
Yeah.
talked to people that make $5-10 million per year, like on
Yeah. I
sales
mean, like
calls for specific.
mostly like thinking that they understand like what's your agenda, or if there's like an agenda behind that question, like do you really need to know that? Like sort of like that's what I like some people can think. Um,
So
yeah,
again, I think that's assumption though, right?
true.
You'd assume what they think, but
Yes.
a lot of times if they're having issues, then there's likely some questions they haven't asked themselves.
Mm,
And because at the end of the day, if they wanted to be like, even if they're a business owner making 100K a month, like if they genuinely were in a position to make 200 or 300K a month, they would have already gotten there. So again, it goes back to there's questions that just weren't asked. And that also goes back to you like actually having the leadership frame through the call. Because if you start off the call like they don't take you seriously, you kind of let that frame continue on with the call, then of course you're going to feel nervous during the call because you just didn't set it up correctly from the beginning. Like that's why like these executives and CEOs, they go to a doctor. They don't say, hey, the doctor, makes 400K a year. I make 10 million. Like, why should I listen to them?
yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, you as a person, you have a problem you can solve for that big mechanism. Doesn't matter what the mechanism, you have a problem they can solve. There's a reason they're not where they want to be. And if you find that you can genuinely help them get there, then again, like you're the one in authority.
Yes.
And this is something that actually came up for me specifically with doctors, right? Because I was like this Hispanic kid, like I was
Mm,
21 years old, telling these doctors, right, about like a 10 to $50,000 investment. I'm like, oh, like, should I even be challenging this prospect? At the end of the day, they have the credentials, they have more money than I do, they have more life experience than I do. Like they've likely asked themselves this. But then when I ask the question, they're like, oh, I never thought about it.
mm,
Like, I guess I do need to make a change. So again, it was whenever I removed that belief that I just assumed that was the case, and I just asked it. And again, I have to ask it with confidence as well. Like I'm like, but like, why not? Like, they're not going to
mhm.
take you serious, right? But if you just flow with the conversation, they'll be like, oh, because of this, and it's like,
Yes.
okay, cool. And again, you as a person, you just take it natural because again, you're a consultant, you're a salesperson, closer. Like it is natural. You're just
Mhm.
asking a question, but your assumption that you might get a pushback and be like, why are you asking me that? Like it's probably the reason that you don't ask it, which goes
Yes.
back to when they give you those think about it objections because there was never urgency or clarification on these things.
Mhm.
And then you're having all these follow-ups or no sales, right? But it all lingers even sometimes from just one question.
Yeah,
But if you
100%.
struggle with one question, then you likely struggle with a couple of other questions. So then now we're looking at an actual problem of like, hey, there's probably things you're not doing during
Mhm.
the actual. And now this is actually, if we just fix that one tweak, which is the identity and actually asking and not making assumptions, that could be the difference between you where you're at now and just where you want to be with your closing percentage or with your business.
Yes. Yeah, that's super interesting. Um, another question, like what happens like when there's different services with similar basically service delivery in terms of what they deliver overall? Like in those cases, what makes the difference in the sales process? And I guess everything that we just went through, like how effective each of these points is, or I'm not sure if it's like the trust building, like how much trust you're building in the conversation, like when we have similar services between like that they're having conversations with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like if they're like the type of person that's like, hey, I'm just, I'm talking to 4 other marketing companies and like that type of
Yeah, no,
situation, or
not necessarily marketing, like just overall, like even like whether that's sales training, like
yeah, like if
they
they're
they
looking at
see it
companies and
exactly,
talking to you.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times in that case, right, it's going to be the person who's able to go deep enough during the conversation, who's able to help them actually clarify and realize things. Because
Okay,
again,
interesting.
like say coaches who coach other agencies or marketing agency owners, right? A lot of times, maybe sometimes you'll get like a person who's just like, hey, any marketing company that helps, I don't know, chiropractors, like I'll just sign on, like I just trust it right away. But most time people are going to be like, well, I want to see and make sure that a marketing company can help me for my chiropractor business. Right. It definitely helps if you're already just a specific niche chiropractor marketing agency, right? Which is why those like niche down agencies excel pretty well
Yeah.
because again, it just brings a pool of people that just feel so heard. And so now it's like, but if you're a general marketing company, right now it's just very important to make sure that you can tailor it down to their specific, company needs, understanding the problem well enough, and then giving them a really good pitch per se presentation, outlining specifically how you're going to help them resolve it and help them get to the other side where they want to go. And so again, that just goes back to going deep enough into discovery to be able to ask the right questions to fully understand the scope of the whole thing situation, and then the identity to make the change. And then at the end, it would just be like, this is such a profound conversation that
Mhm.
like this, I feel like this person is genuinely like, when he told me that he can help me, like I genuinely felt that he could. Like, because sometimes people are just gonna ask blatant scripted questions. They probably heard it from 4 other marketing companies, the same questions from the same reps. And then at
Mhm.
the end, they're like, well, based on what you told me, we can help. And they're like, well, you didn't really ask me much.
Yes.
Nothing specific business. You just asked me random questions. But if they find that person who's like specifically wanting to know details and intricates of your business, they'll be like, oh no, this guy actually, like I
Mhm.
felt that he asked me enough questions to then be able to confidently tell me that he can help me.
100%. Yeah. And do you feel like, for example, like, do you feel like time is a variable when it comes to making sure that you're getting deep enough in the conversation for you to close that gap? Or it's not even time, but asking the right things, like, because every now and like we always heard like, okay, I closed the deal in 15 minutes, like top closers, even yourself. I've seen it like a lot, like, okay, I just closed the deal. It's been like fucking 15 minutes, right? Like, what do you feel like makes a difference in not needing time, but just asking the right stuff, like in that conversation?
Yeah, you just get more fluid with it over time. Like I can't say like it's one of those things that it's like a muscle that you build per se
Yeah.
that you're identifying, okay, right? Like I what might have taken me 3 questions to get this answered now only
Mm,
took me 2. And so you start
okay.
learning patterns, especially when you work with a specific niche and avatar, a lot of times you'll be able to tone that down very, very quickly.
Yes.
But sometimes again, like maybe sometimes you do have to ask more questions. It's kind of like that muscle that says, hey, like again, I just don't clearly understand it enough. I do have to ask more questions to better clarify that. And then, but over time, it's just one of the things that come naturally. And especially once you start identifying key patterns from different people, you'll be able to shorten it down. But I would always say, like, as well, like the reason that you'll see people that have these like 60, 80-minute calls is like there's things that they're either letting the client or prospect ramble on for too
Mm,
long, or just asking all these mixed questions that kind of lead to nowhere. And the reason why a lot of those longer calls don't end up becoming sales is because there's like mental fatigue, right? If you think about how often you speak to somebody for 40 to 60 minutes straight, it's like it's not very often. So like
exactly.
eventually your brain starts kind of
Yeah.
turning off and thinking about
100%.
others. So you might have been trying to get them into this emotional state that we can do it within 20, 30 minutes. But if you let that linger on for 30 more minutes and 40 more minutes, like that goes away. And then that goes
Yes.
back to like, now we're getting to the solution, but they don't feel that same level of pain that they did. And now they're just like, oh, I need to think about it. Or yeah, like, let me just
I'm
10 minutes
just
of call,
overwhelmed. Yeah.
pretty much overwhelmed.
It's overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. That's interesting. Okay, now getting a little bit more in the sales management side of the process, like what's like your process or that you've seen, like what's the ideal process for onboarding new reps and getting them to actually be productive as fast as possible?
Yeah. So I always want to make sure that we tie down the company's vision to the salesperson's vision as well. So it's important for us to make sure that they see the company as a vehicle in order to be able to meet what they want to achieve as well. Right. So if they want to get to 5K a month, right, we would just simply reverse engineer what it takes to get there. And maybe
Mm,
even understand why they want to get there, right? So they can start getting a little bit more personal with us, where it's like, okay, good culture versus like, we're open and transparent with one another. And if they want to
mhm,
get to 5 months with my company, okay, let's say that I'm in a position where I can, if they close pretty well, they can make 4K a month, right? Now we can make a game plan that, hey, we can collect this much cash, more than willing to reinvest into ads, which will actually allow you to get past 50K a month in cash collected, which is 5K a
mhm.
month in commissions, right? And so it's almost like you build the business like kind of with the vision of that salesperson so that it ties down. So whenever they're feeling demotivated and XYZ, right, you can always come back and be like, hey man, like I know we had this conversation, let's say 4 weeks ago or something. You want to get to 5K a month, and maybe you've had a slow week this time, but like
Mhm.
let's figure it out. And that goes back to a bit of identity, but making sure that the motive is like, hey, I'll help where I can to help you make that 5K, so that like you mentioned, we're still on track for you to start saving up money so you can move this, out of this town and have your own place and get your own car. And right now you can tell them, and not just now, you can tell them more from a perspective that's personal to them, rather than just being like, hey man, like, well, like you can do it. Like, let's get to 50K this month. Right.
Yes.
So like, okay, right. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Being more
But
focused towards our goals. Hmm.
yeah, it's again, like, right, we want to make sure that our company mission vision can serve theirs, because if it can help them get to their vehicle and their destination, that they're a lot more, that internal motivation is going to be there and that discipline is going to be there, versus us having to motivate them through external sources like just making money. And again, if they don't want to make that money, they don't care, right? It's like they're
Yeah.
just not going to. But the other thing as well is when they're onboarding, it's important for us to be able to give them a bit of examples as well. Because sometimes what some companies do is like maybe they'll get 30 or 40K and they'll try to start delegating sales too early on, right? Without any actual like recordings or anything for somebody coming in. They just want a closer to come in and close for them. It's just like, hey, I just
Definitely.
want to close. And then like that just leads to inconsistency, and the closer's just like, is this guy even making 30K a month? Right? Because they're like, I've seen no sales call of this guy actually
Hmm.
close. Yeah, I'm just a test dummy. And then from there, the motivation gets lost. They, stop showing up the
Definitely.
way they should, and everything just goes downhill.
Yeah. Making sure that there's already proof of concept, market fit, like with the offer, and that there's already closes being made. Otherwise, it's basically like a sales like a incubator, right? Like, and that's not really like the business that you're in 100%. As a sales manager, like what's the process for optimizing sales reps? Like whenever you feel like they're not closing at what they should be closing, like how do you get like more granular, or okay, like this is what's going on and this is
Mhm.
what they're lacking?
Yeah, so we'll do like call reviews. Well, like every sales rep always has to record their sales call, so we can identify pretty easily. But we also have trackers, which like allows us to, okay, like look at some data points, which is like how long was the call? Okay, this was a 90-minute call. Okay, let's look at like why that even was, right? Kind of
Mm-hmm.
lets us things. Or maybe even if they have like their sales call notes, where we're like, because we also make them take notes and they post it on the tracker,
Yeah.
and we see their notes are just like 2 or 3 words. I was like, okay, this guy listening, or like, there's something likely that's
Yeah.
happening based on data points that we're seeing here. Um, and then we get on the actual call and we can, identify those main things. But a lot of times I would just give them like one thing to change, like the biggest thing that I feel is the lever that's caused them to lose sales, and then have them change it, maybe take 5 more calls. If they've adjusted, awesome. They should also be seeing an improvement in their close rate. If they haven't, you have to, again, have that same conversation. Like, why is this not being done? Right? Let's say, for example, if it was important for them to not speak over the client multiple times and start rambling on about different things, and they keep doing it, right? It's like, okay, that's like a warning. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, it happens, right?
Yes.
and it depends how strict you want to be with your company, right? But it's like, hey, if this isn't identified, like now you're gonna either be moved down to outbound, which
Mhm.
is like you have to set your own calls, and now you have to, set your own calls and have those calls. You're not gonna get any paid ads straight to your calendar right now until you start getting hit back to KPI, or you just get let go.
Yes.
Like it's
Yes.
also, it comes back to like we want to find people that are receptive and are willing to be coached and helped. Because if you find somebody who's just always like, no, like I know it all, but my close rate is also bad and all that stuff, like you're just fighting an uphill battle, which is never that sometimes a lot of reps or companies do. They keep a rep for too long and ends
Mhm.
up costing hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, and I guess it's also a good idea to split test, like having at least two different reps, so you can isolate the variable of, I guess, like what's the issue, and making sure that you're not just accepting whatever like they're saying without really like isolating that variable. Yeah,
Yeah, it depends how big the company is, right? If you
sure.
have like 1 or 2 reps, you can test. But if it's like just that one rep and you're
Hmm.
barely scaling, right? It's like, again, you still want to make sure it's important, especially if they're not closing deals, because regardless, right? If you want to keep them on, cool. But like now it's just like you're jeopardizing the growth of your company for that one person. And if that's worth it to you, then, again, that's your decision. But,
Yeah.
very early on, you have to be willing to make these decisions, or you're just going to stay stuck in that position. And then eventually you'll even get to the point where you're not even profitable, which is even in worse condition for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, right. This was a super interesting conversation, man. I'm pretty sure that people that are seeing this video, they're getting a lot of value from this. So yes, I really appreciate your time, Eliseo, and yes, awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Rob, it was great speaking to you, man.